Ethan Cole stood at the wide bay window of his weathered farmhouse, watching the gravel driveway disappear into the late October mist. The rain had been falling steadily since dawn, turning the air cold and heavy. Before we continue, please subscribe my channel for such more stories, and let us know where you are listening in the comments. At 60, his body still carried the square shoulders and deliberate stance of his years in the army, though the lines on his face told of battles fought far beyond foreign soil. Losing his wife Laura 2 years earlier had carved a hollow place in him, a space that no amount of chores, fishing trips or quiet evenings could fill. Today that space felt different. Anticipation sat in his chest like a weight. His daughter Claire was coming for the weekend, and she was bringing his grandson Jacob. It should have been a simple family visit, but for reasons he couldn't quite name, he had been restless since she called. There was something in her voice during that brief conversation, light, polite, but not quite steady. At precisely 3 o'clock, headlights broke through the curtain of rain. Ethan stepped closer to the window, his palm pressing against the cool glass as the familiar silver sedan rolled to a stop. The driver's door opened slowly, and Claire emerged, wearing a navy raincoat with the hood pulled tight. Her movements caught him off guard, deliberate, almost guarded, like someone afraid the ground might give way beneath her feet. From the passenger side, a small figure tumbled out. "Grandpa." Jacob's voice rang through the drizzle, bright and unrestrained. The boy's sandy hair clung to his forehead as he sprinted toward the porch, his sneakers splashing through shallow puddles. Ethan opened the door just in time to scoop him up in a strong embrace. "There's my little explorer," he said, smiling as Jacob clung to his neck. The warmth of the boy's arms was like a burst of sunshine against the chill in the air, but even in that moment, Ethan's gaze drifted past his grandson to Claire. She was beautiful, in the way her mother had been, delicate cheekbones, expressive eyes, but today those eyes were shadowed. Her smile didn't reach them, and she glanced over her shoulder more than once, scanning the empty road as though expecting someone to follow. "Hi, Dad." She leaned in for a quick hug, one arm looping around him while the other held her handbag close, almost protectively. "Good to see you, sweetheart." "How was the drive from Ashford?" he asked, taking the bag from her hand. "Fine. Good. No problems," she replied too quickly, her words strung tight like a frayed wire. Inside, Jacob darted into the living room where his toys from previous visits waited, each one carefully kept in a wicker basket by the fireplace. Ethan hung up Claire's coat and took her damp bag to the kitchen. "Coffee?" he asked. "That'd be great," she said, slipping into one of the chairs at the old oak table where she'd done her homework as a teenager. Her eyes kept flicking to the phone in her lap. Ethan filled 2 mugs, the smell of fresh brew rising like an old comfort. "Everything okay back home?" he asked, setting the steaming cup in front of her. Claire's fingers tightened around the handle, her knuckles pale. "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" She gave a small shrug, just tired from the drive, but she wasn't fine. He could see it, the tremor in her voice, the way she avoided his eyes, the tightness in her shoulders. Years of military service had taught him to read more in silence than in words. Something was wrong. Something had followed her here, even if it wasn't visible yet. Jacob's laughter drifted in from the living room, a small reminder of what mattered most. Ethan decided not to press her, at least not yet, but deep down he already knew this visit would change everything. The rest of the afternoon passed with the quiet rhythm of a family trying to act normal. Jacob built towers of wooden blocks in the living room, while Ethan sat nearby, pretending to read the newspaper, but never truly taking his eyes off Claire. She kept drifting toward the window, peeking through the curtains every few minutes, as though the rain-soaked driveway held some hidden threat. By 6, the storm had deepened. Wind rattled the branches outside, and the steady drum of rain on the roof made the house feel smaller, closer. Ethan moved into the kitchen to start dinner. Roast chicken, potatoes, and green beans, the sort of hearty meal Laura used to make when Claire was little. It was the kind of food that was supposed to draw people together, to make conversation easier, but the silence at the table felt heavier than the steam rising from their plates. Jacob ate quickly, talking about his favorite book at school, oblivious to the currents passing between his mother and grandfather. Every so often, Claire would smile at him, but as soon as Jacob looked away, that smile would collapse, replaced by the same faraway stare. When the boy finally excused himself to watch a movie in the den, Ethan leaned back in his chair and studied his daughter. "Claire," he said gently, "you've been on edge since you got here. If something's wrong, I need to know." She shook her head. "It's nothing, Dad. Really, I just..." She stopped herself, her gaze fixed on the table. "I'm tired, that's all." He wanted to believe her, but he saw the way her hand trembled when she reached for her water glass. He'd seen that same look on soldiers who had just returned from hostile ground, trying to convince themselves they were safe when every nerve in their body said otherwise. After dinner, Ethan stacked the dishes in the sink and told Claire to relax in the living room. Instead, she slipped into the hallway and quietly pulled out her phone, speaking in a hushed voice that carried just enough for him to hear fragments. "No, not tonight. I told you, please stop calling." Her voice broke on the last word. When she noticed him in the doorway, she quickly ended the call. "Work thing," she said, forcing a thin smile. "You know how it is." Ethan didn't press, but his mind was already churning. Whoever she'd been speaking to hadn't sounded like a co-worker. The sharp edge in her tone had been closer to fear than frustration. That night, after Jacob had fallen asleep on the pull-out couch in the guest room, Ethan passed by Claire's door and found it closed. But he could hear her moving inside, pacing, opening drawers, then stopping for long stretches of silence. The urge to knock and demand answers was strong, but years of discipline told him that sometimes people needed to offer the truth on their own. Still, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Ethan's instincts screamed. Something had driven his daughter here, and whatever it wasn't finished yet. He didn't know it then, but the answer would arrive sooner than he expected, written in hurried, desperate handwriting that would change everything. Morning came grey and watchful. The storm had slunk off toward the hills, leaving behind a sky the color of tin and puddles that mirrored the skeletal maples along the drive. Ethan rose before the sun, brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and listened to his house breathe, the heater's low hum, the refrigerator's tired click, Jacob's faint whistle of sleep. From down the hall came the soft scuff of Claire's footsteps. She hadn't slept. He could tell by the careful way she moved, like someone trying not to wake a dangerous animal she thought might be standing right outside the door. "I promised Jacob we'd take the early train into town," she said when she reached the kitchen, eyes swollen but determined. "He wants to see the aquarium exhibit at the museum. It closes this weekend." Ethan studied her for a beat. The museum was in Briar Ridge, the next county over, not far, but far enough to make a morning of it. He felt the nudge of suspicion. Plans that sounded ordinary could hide their reasons. Still, he only nodded. "I'll drive you to the station. The roads are slick." Claire's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "Thanks, Dad." They roused Jacob with pancakes and maple syrup, and for 20 blessed minutes the kitchen was all chatter and clatter, a little boy's excitement spilling over the edges of his plate. Ethan let the noise settle in his bones like warmth. He cleaned up while Claire zipped Jacob's coat and folded a small blanket into her tote. Ready, not ready. Her every movement struck him as a compromise between those two poles. The Briar Ridge station sat in a shallow valley where the tracks kinked like a scar. The building itself was an old brick rectangle with green trim and a clock that had been 5 minutes slow since Ethan himself was a teenager. He pulled into the lot and killed the engine. On the platform, commuters huddled in clusters, shoulders tucked, breath fogging. A newspaper vendor was setting out neat stacks that would soon be messy, and someone's coffee steamed on the bench like an invitation to theft. Ethan stepped out first, scanning by habit, corners, sightlines, exits. The morning smelled of wet iron and cold stone. He felt Claire pause beside him, and when he glanced over, she was watching the far end of the platform as if it were a door. Jacob tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Grandpa, do trains ever roar like lions?" "Sometimes," Ethan said, tousling his hair, "and sometimes they sigh like old men." That won a small giggle, quick and bright. For a moment the world sharpened into simple shapes. A boy, his mother, a train that would come and go. Then Claire's phone buzzed. She didn't look at the screen. She just slid the device deeper into her coat pocket, as though it might burn her if she let it touch skin. "Which line?" Ethan asked. "Blue," she said, voice thin. 2 stops. The PA system crackled, a woman's voice, distant and indifferent. "Blue line inbound, 2 minutes." Ethan checked the clock. 5 minutes slow, still useless. When he looked back, a sleek black SUV had eased into a space at the far edge of the lot. Too glossy, too deliberate. He felt the hair rise on his forearms the way it always had right before a bad situation turned worse. The rear door of the SUV opened. A man stepped out, tall, athletic in a gym-sculpted way, his jawline a weapon he'd learned to wield. Grant Harrow. Ethan recognized him from photographs, wedding pictures where Grant's smile was all teeth and no warmth, office photos of Harrow and Locke Financial, with the gleam of money lacquered over everything that should have been human. The passenger door opened next. Evelyn Harrow emerged, elegant as a winter knife. She wore a camel coat and gloves the color of cream, and a silk scarf that probably had a biography more interesting than most people's lives. The mother-in-law, the architect of rooms that kept their doors open while quietly locking the windows. Claire froze. For a heartbeat, her face rearranged itself into the one she wore at barbecues and holiday dinners, pleased, agreeable, grateful for everyone's concern. Then it crumpled at the edges. She took Jacob's hand. "Stay close," she murmured. "Don't let go." Grant walked like he owned the platform. Evelyn didn't walk. She floated, the way expensive people do when they're sure the ground will never betray them. Ethan moved a half step forward, not aggressive, just present, the way a tree is present to wind. He said nothing. The waiting crowd subtly shifted, creating a little stage none of them had asked for. "Claire," Grant said, tone smooth enough to skate on, "you didn't answer my calls." "I told you I needed the weekend," she replied, and Ethan heard the tremor she was trying to swallow. "I told you Jacob and I were visiting my father." Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We worry. Families do." Her gaze slid to Ethan like a blade tasting air. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." "Morning," he said. "Train's due." Grant crouched to Jacob's level with a counterfeit softness Ethan had seen before in recruiters who wanted boys to sign papers they didn't fully understand. "Buddy, we've got tickets to the hockey game tonight. You love the Warriors, remember?" Jacob curled closer to Claire's leg. "I'm going to the aquarium." Grant's eyes flicked up. "We'll all go, right after you come home. Your mother must have forgotten to tell us the plan." Claire's throat worked. She fished in her tote and pulled out the folded blanket. "It's my weekend," she said, steadying herself on the words. "The schedule says so." Evelyn's smile sharpened. "Schedules bend for important people. Your father knows that, surely." "Schedules hold for children," Ethan said, even, not loud at all, "especially for them." The PA crackled again. 1 minute out, the rails began to hum. The crowd pressed forward, that little surge of impatience that always looks like eagerness until something goes wrong. Claire lifted her tote onto her shoulder and leaned toward Ethan as if to ask for one more cup of strength. In that small lean, in the angle of her body, he saw the plan she hadn't said out loud. She took Jacob's other hand. "Sweetie, give Grandpa a hug before we board." Jacob went willingly, arms flung around Ethan's waist. Ethan hugged him back with a control that cost him something. When he looked over the boy's head, Claire had slipped her phone from her pocket, with a motion so practiced it had to be new. She ran her thumb under the case, as if it were a loose thread, and freed something small, a slip of paper, no bigger than a library receipt, creased and thinned from being folded too many times. She stepped into Ethan's arms, brief and careful, cheek to his shoulder, breath skating down to where his heart thudded. Her fingers found his palm and pressed the paper there, so fast and sure that anyone watching would have thought it a nervous squeeze. Her whisper was not a sound, but the shape of one. "Please." The train's headlamp burst into view, pouring light down the tracks. The wind off its face slapped coats and tugged scarves. Grant straightened, eyes narrowing, sensing a move he couldn't see. Evelyn reached for Claire's elbow, a genteel correction, a reminder of choreography. Claire stepped back, taking Jacob with her. "We have to go," she said, and for the first time that morning she looked directly at Ethan. No performance, no mask. Her eyes were two emergencies. "Dad, thank you for breakfast." The doors hissed open. People flowed, made of elbows and apologies. Claire and Jacob slipped into the river and vanished inside a car. Grant turned to follow, but Ethan moved a fraction to the left, just enough to force him to adjust, just enough to steal 2 seconds. In a life where seconds sometimes made the difference between regret and survival, Ethan honored those seconds like currency. Evelyn's voice brushed his ear as she passed. "You always did confuse stubbornness with love. And you always did confuse control with care," he said almost pleasantly. The doors closed. The train sighed, thought about staying, then decided against it. As it slid away, Claire appeared in the window, one hand lifting, not quite a wave. Jacob's face popped up beside hers, pressed to the glass, a round moon smeared by motion. Then they were gone, the cars shrinking into a silver whisper that curved north along the valley and out of sight. Ethan stood alone on the platform, pulse drumming in his wrists. The slip of paper felt hot in his palm. He did not open it there. He did not give anyone the satisfaction of a reaction. He tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket, next to the place where a younger man had once kept a small notebook of coordinates and names. Old habits, older promises. Grant stared at the empty tracks with a fury that had nowhere to land. "She's being dramatic," he said finally, like he needed the words to prove themselves true. Evelyn's gaze had gone flat, amphibian and patient. "Dramatics are just stories that haven't been edited. We'll cut the parts we don't like." Ethan let them go ahead of him, watched the black SUV glide out smooth as a shark, then walked to his truck at a pace that would not read as hurry. Only when the cab door thunked shut and the world narrowed to rain-specked glass did he take the paper out. Her handwriting was frantic but tidy, the way she'd written college essays the night before they were due, under pressure, precise anyway. "Dad, I'm not safe. They watch my phone. They listen. Grant follows our schedule. His mother controls our money. There are bruises I hide and threats I can't. I'm scared for Jacob. If I say no, they say they'll restructure. I don't know what that means anymore. Please protect him. Do not call me back. I'll call you when I can. If something happens, tell Officer Tessa Vaughn in Briar Ridge and Attorney Arlena Price in Camber. They know pieces. I love you. Please don't send me home." For a moment, the cab filled with a soundless roar, the world blurring into the white noise of shock. Then Ethan's mind clicked into the old gear, the one he hadn't needed since the worst year of his life. Steps, names, doors and the keys to them. He folded the paper back along its weary seams and slid it into his wallet, as if it were currency he might have to spend quickly. The sky brightened by a degree. Across the lot, a city worker salted the slick spots on the platform where people would go on living without knowing anything about the storm gathering 2 counties wide. Ethan started the truck and pulled onto the road, the tires hissing a promise he intended to keep. He did not yet know how wide the net would spread, or how much rot would spill out when he tugged on this one thread. He only knew the shape of his job now: protect the child, extract the truth, and make sure the people who called themselves family learned what that word actually cost. Ethan didn't drive straight home. Old instincts told him never to walk back into the same doorway after you've been handed dangerous information. He took a different route through the outskirts of town, letting the truck's engine hum in the background while his mind replayed every line of Claire's note. The names she'd left, Officer Tessa Vaughn, Attorney Arlena Price, were more than names. They were lifelines, carefully chosen and not written lightly. By the time he pulled into the lot behind the Briar Ridge Police Department, the rain had picked up again, making the asphalt shine like black glass. He sat for a moment, scanning the building. It was a modest structure, 2 stories, brick-facing, American flag snapping against the damp wind. Through the front windows, he could see the soft glow of fluorescence, the kind of light that could make bad news seem even worse. He walked inside and approached the reception counter. A young officer looked up, her expression polite but cautious. "Can I help you? I'm here for Officer Tessa Vaughn," Ethan said. "Tell her it's about Claire Harrow. She'll know the name." The officer made a quick call, speaking in a tone too low for him to catch more than a few words. Less than a minute later, a woman emerged from a side hallway. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. She moved with the sort of calm authority that suggested she'd seen more than her share of difficult nights. "Mr. Cole," she asked, stepping forward. "That's right. I'm Officer Vaughn. Let's talk somewhere private." She led him into a small interview room. The air was cool, the hum of the vent filling the spaces between their words. Ethan handed her the folded note. She read it slowly, her jaw tightening. "She told you to find me because she knew I'd believe her," Vaughn said finally, setting the paper down. "I've taken 2 reports from her in the last year. Both times she recanted before we could file charges. Her husband's family has influence here. Money, connections. They make things disappear." Ethan kept his voice even. "She says they're watching her phone, tracking her. She's afraid for Jacob." Vaughn nodded grimly. "That doesn't surprise me. But if she's not willing to come forward now, my hands are tied. I can document this note, but without her statement, it's not enough to pull her or the boy out of that house permanently." "Then I'll get you more," Ethan said, leaning forward. "Whatever you need." She studied him for a moment, then slid a business card across the table. "If you see anything, bruises, recordings, anything that shows immediate danger, you bring it to me directly. I can move fast when I have to." Ethan pocketed the card and left the station with a new sense of purpose. The air outside smelled of wet pavement and cold determination. His next stop was Camber, a 30-minute drive south, where attorney Arlena Price kept an office above a hardware store. The building was old, but the brass nameplate on her door gleamed. Inside, the office was warm, lined with shelves of thick law books. Price herself was a tall woman with silver hair swept into a low twist, her handshake firm enough to remind Ethan she'd fought her own battles. He laid the note on her desk. She read it twice, then looked up with eyes that had seen too many cases like this. "Your daughter's smart. She knows not to put certain things in writing. This is just enough to tell me the iceberg is bigger than what's showing. She's trapped," Ethan said, "and they're careful, too careful. What can we do?" Price tapped a pen against the paper. "If we can prove sustained abuse or endangerment to the child, we can petition for an emergency protective order. That would force law enforcement to remove Jacob and give temporary custody to your daughter, or to you if necessary. But this family, they'll fight dirty. We'll need witnesses, physical evidence, maybe even financial records to show control or coercion. I'll get you all of it," Ethan said. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Just remember, collect it clean. If you cross the line, they'll use it against you and against her." By the time Ethan stepped back into the street, the rain had slowed to a mist. The town's streetlights flickered in the early dusk, casting pools of pale yellow on the sidewalk. He turned his collar up and started toward his truck, feeling the weight of the task ahead. Claire's note wasn't just a plea. It was a map, one that would lead him straight into the Caldwell shadows, and Ethan had no intention of leaving until every light in their world was switched on. The drive back to his farm felt longer than it should have. Every mile seemed to stretch with the weight of what he'd learned and what he hadn't yet. The note had confirmed Claire was in trouble. Officer Vaughn and Attorney Price had given him starting points. But starting points weren't enough. He needed openings, weaknesses in the Caldwell's armor, and he needed them fast. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the daylight had thinned to a silver haze. Jacob was on the porch, bundled in a sweatshirt, playing with a toy truck. The sight should have been comforting, but it only deepened Ethan's resolve. The boy didn't know how much danger his mother feared for him. That ignorance was a fragile gift, and Ethan intended to keep it intact. Claire came to the door when she saw his truck. Her face was carefully composed, but her eyes searched his, as if asking whether he'd read the note. He didn't speak until Jacob ran inside. "I've met with both people you named," he said quietly. "They're ready to help, but we have to give them more." She exhaled, a small sound that seemed to carry weeks of held breath. "That's going to be hard. Grant monitors everything. My calls, my accounts, even my car's GPS, and my mother-in-law." She trailed off, shaking her head. Ethan stepped closer. "There are people who talk. Someone in their circle has seen something. Someone who doesn't like what they've become." Claire's gaze flicked up, uncertain. "There was a woman, Rosa. She worked for them for years, took care of Jacob when he was a baby. She left last spring. I don't know why. Grant said she wasn't a good fit anymore." "Do you know where she went?" Ethan asked. Claire hesitated. "I think she's still in town. She's kind. She might talk to you." That night, after Jacob was asleep, Ethan pulled out his old leather notebook. The pages were filled with neat, blocky handwriting, remnants of a life where gathering intelligence had been part of the job. He wrote down names: Rosa, Cal Whitmore, a few others who had once done contract work for the Caldwells. If they'd been cast aside, they might be willing to speak. The next morning, he found Rosa in a modest duplex on the edge of town. She opened the door with cautious eyes, but they softened when he explained who he was. "I remember you," she said, her accent lilting softly. "Claire's father. You came to the house a few times when Jacob was little." Ethan nodded. "Claire needs help. She can't say much right now, but she told me you might know why she's not safe." Rosa's hand tightened on the doorframe. "I saw things, heard things. Mrs. Harrow has cameras everywhere in that house, except the laundry room. That's where they spoke freely. Business things, illegal things, money going places it shouldn't. And I saw the way Grant treated Claire, like property." "Do you have proof?" Ethan asked. Her expression wavered. "I kept copies, security footage. I didn't trust them. I have it on a drive, but if they find out I have it, they won't," Ethan said firmly. "If you give it to me, I'll make sure it goes to people who can use it, people who can protect you." Rosa disappeared into the back room and returned with a small USB drive, wrapped in tissue as if it was something delicate. This has a few weeks of recordings. Some have sound. You'll hear Mrs. Harrow talking about shipments and moving product before the inspection. I don't know what it means, but it's not legal. Ethan took it with the same care she'd shown in handing it over. You've done the right thing, and you've just given us the first crack in their wall. Driving away, the weight in his chest shifted. It wasn't lighter, this fight would be long and ugly, but it was sharper now, focused. The Caldwells had built their control on fear and silence, and with this drive, Ethan had found a way to start breaking both. Ethan didn't go home right away. The kind of evidence Rosa had given him wasn't something you just dropped on your kitchen table and hoped would keep. He needed a safe place to make copies and review it. Years ago, he'd kept a small storage unit on the edge of town, half for old military gear, half for tools and files he didn't want lying around the house. It still had power, a battered desk, and a laptop that had never touched the internet under his own name. That would do. Inside the storage unit, the air was cool and faintly metallic. He locked the door behind him, plugged in the laptop, and slid the USB drive into place. Folders appeared almost instantly, each labeled with a date and time. He opened the first one and pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. The laundry room Rosa had mentioned looked ordinary. White walls, shelves stacked with folded linens, a humming dryer in the corner. But in the frame stood Evelyn Harrow, her voice low and precise as she spoke to a man Ethan didn't recognize. "We'll move the inventory before the county inspection," she was saying. "I want the papers clean by Monday, no exceptions." The man nodded, muttering something about shipment routes and a transfer point near the river docks. Ethan clicked through more clips. In another, Grant's voice came sharp from off-camera, berating Claire over a schedule change and accusing her of making him look bad in front of clients. The contempt in his tone was so thick, Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He copied everything onto an encrypted drive of his own, then made a second copy on a blank USB, one for Attorney Price, one for Officer Vaughan. The original went back into a sealed evidence bag he kept in a locked metal box. Years of habit told him redundancy was safety. By the time he left the storage unit, dusk had fallen again. The drive home wound through quiet back roads, headlights cutting tunnels through the dark. Ethan's mind kept circling the same thought. This was enough to rattle the Caldwells, maybe even open a formal investigation. But he couldn't drop it all at once. If they caught wind too soon, they'd bury whatever else they had and close ranks tighter than before. When he walked into the farmhouse, Claire was sitting on the couch with Jacob curled against her side, both of them watching an old cartoon. She muted the TV when she saw him. "Everything okay?" she asked, searching his face. "I found something," Ethan said carefully. "It's a start. I'm passing it to the right people." Her shoulders sagged, part relief, part exhaustion. "They won't take it well when they find out." "They won't find out until it's too late," he said, his voice steady. "That's the point." Later, after Jacob was in bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his notebook open, sketching out the next steps. Witnesses, paper trails, patterns of movement. He thought about Evelyn's mention of inventory and routes and decided the docks might hold more answers. He also knew he'd need someone who could navigate the Harrows world without drawing attention, someone already in their circle but not loyal to them. An idea came, uninvited but solid: Cal Whitmore, an old acquaintance from his service days who now worked in logistics for one of the county's larger shipping companies. If anyone could quietly track the Harrows' movements and cargo, it would be Cal. Ethan closed the notebook and looked toward the dark hallway where his daughter and grandson slept. The Caldwells believed they owned every piece of the board. They hadn't realized yet that someone else had begun to play and that the rules were about to change. The following morning, Ethan was up before the sun. The November air had a bite to it, the kind that made you feel every old injury you'd ever earned. He poured coffee into a travel mug, grabbed his notebook, and slipped out while the house was still quiet. Claire and Jacob needed rest. What he needed was movement and a man he could trust. Cal Whitmore's office wasn't really an office at all. It was a cramped corner inside the break room of a shipping warehouse on the south end of Briar Ridge. The smell of diesel, coffee, and cold metal hung in the air as Ethan stepped inside. Workers in reflective vests moved pallets across the floor while forklifts beeped in warning. In the middle of it all sat Cal, leaning back in a folding chair with his boots up on a file cabinet, a styrofoam cup in hand. When he saw Ethan, his face cracked into a grin that didn't belong in a place this noisy. "Cole, I was starting to think you'd gone soft living out in that farmhouse." Ethan returned the smile. Still plenty of fight left, I wouldn't be here otherwise. Cal kicked his boots down and gestured to the chair opposite him. All right, let's hear it. Ethan kept his voice low, his words deliberate. He explained enough for Cal to understand. Claire was in trouble, her husband's family was involved in things they didn't want seen, and there were whispers of shipments and hidden inventory moving through the county. He didn't mention the USB drive or the footage. Those details were for people sworn to handle evidence. But he made it clear that time mattered. Cal's easy expression faded into something harder. You're telling me you want eyes on the Harrow's movements, shipping manifests, truck routes, dock schedules, that sort of thing. I need to know where they move their goods, when and with who, Ethan said, quietly. If they catch wind of it, Claire and Jacob will be in even more danger. Cal scratched his chin. I can get you some of that. The docks are like a gossip mill. Half the guys down there would spill their own birthdays if you bought them a beer. But if Evelyn Harrow's got her hooks in these shipments, she's probably using trusted drivers and private bays. That'll take finesse. You've still got finesse, Ethan said, watching his old friend weigh the request. Cal smirked. Still, huh? All right. I'll poke around, but you need to be ready. If I find something big, we won't have long before they move it or bury it. They shook on it, a firm grip that carried the weight of shared history. Ethan left with a promise to check in every few days, though both men knew it might be sooner if trouble surfaced. On his way back, Ethan took the long route, passing the old river docks. Even in daylight, they looked like the kind of place where things happened that never made it onto paperwork. Narrow slips between warehouses, stacked containers casting long shadows, and unmarked vans idling with engines running. He could almost hear Evelyn's voice from the footage, talking about inventory and clean papers. By the time he reached the farmhouse, Claire was on the porch, a mug of tea cupped in both hands. She looked better than she had yesterday, but her eyes still held that restless watchfulness. Everything okay? She asked. For now, Ethan said. I've got someone keeping an eye on things. She gave a faint nod, the kind that said she wanted to ask more but knew better than to push. The less she knew about specifics, the safer she was if the Caldwells tried to corner her. Ethan glanced at Jacob playing in the yard and then back toward the quiet road beyond the trees. The Caldwells thought they owned every path, every channel of control. What they didn't realize yet was that the map was changing, and an old ally had just stepped onto the board. 2 days later, Ethan's phone buzzed just after dawn. The caller ID was blocked, but the voice on the other end was familiar. Got something, Cal said, keeping his tone casual but tight. Meet me at the diner by the rail yard. 10 minutes. Ethan didn't waste time. He scribbled a quick note for Claire, running an errand, locked the doors, and grabbed his jacket. The morning was crisp, the sky streaked with pale light, but his mind was already on what Cal might have uncovered. The diner was half empty when he walked in. Cal sat in a booth near the back, a manila envelope on the table in front of him. His coffee was untouched, which told Ethan more than words. Dock schedules, Cal said, as soon as Ethan slid into the seat. And a couple of shipment logs I shouldn't have. Evelyn's name doesn't appear, but the company listed is one she controls through a shell. They're moving machinery parts, same vague label every time, and routing them through a private bay at Pier 7. No customs inspections, no cameras in that section. Ethan thumbed through the papers. How often? Every other Thursday, midnight offload. The trucks leave before sunrise. This Thursday's one of them. He tapped the paperwork. It gets better or worse, depending on your view. One of my guys swears he saw Grant there last week, talking to a man who's been on the FBI's radar for smuggling. I don't have proof yet, but it's more than smoke. Ethan leaned back, mind turning over the implications. If he could connect Claire's abuse to the family's illegal operations, they'd have less room to maneuver in court. But it also meant the Caldwells might act faster to protect themselves, and that could put Claire and Jacob at greater risk. Cal must have read his thoughts. You'll need to move carefully. They won't let this go quiet if they catch a scent of someone digging. As if on cue, Ethan's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. Stay out of family business. Last warning. He showed it to Cal. Looks like they already suspect, Cal said. You might want to keep your people close. When Ethan got back to the farmhouse, the front gate was ajar. He always closed it. His steps quickened as he walked up the porch, eyes scanning for signs of forced entry. The lock was intact, but the screen door hung slightly off its hinge. Inside, Claire and Jacob were in the kitchen, safe but shaken. Someone knocked hard and didn't wait for an answer, Claire said, her voice unsteady. By the time I got to the door, they were gone. Jacob said he saw a black SUV pulling away. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't need a plate number to know whose vehicle it was. They're testing you, Cal had once told him during a deployment. Poke the perimeter, watch the reaction, then decide how to strike. The Caldwells were doing exactly that. He crouched to Jacob's level. If you see that SUV again, you come find me right away, okay? Jacob nodded, wide-eyed. Later, when the house was quiet, Ethan called Officer Vaughn from the back porch. We've got activity, he said. Threats, and maybe a sighting at the docks. I can get you a shipment schedule. Bring it in tomorrow, Vaughn replied. And be careful, families like theirs don't send warnings unless they're ready to make good on them. Ethan hung up, staring into the dark yard. The first ripples had started to spread, and he knew they'd only get bigger from here. But the Caldwells had made a mistake. They'd pushed too soon, and he was ready to push back harder. Thursday was only 3 days away, but Ethan treated each one like a countdown. Every hour mattered. He spent Monday securing the farmhouse. New locks, reinforced strike plates, a motion-activated camera mounted discreetly above the porch. Tuesday, he paid a quiet visit to a retired friend who had been a county sheriff's deputy. They talked over coffee, and by the time Ethan left, he had a pair of unregistered radios and the promise of a quick backup call if things went sideways. Claire noticed the changes. "You're building a fortress," she said one evening as he tightened a hinge on the back door. "I'm making sure no one walks in here uninvited," he replied, keeping his tone calm. After Thursday, things might shift. Better to be ready. She didn't press for details. Maybe she didn't want to know, or maybe she trusted that whatever he was doing, it was to keep her and Jacob safe. Wednesday night, Ethan met Cal again, this time in the gravel lot behind a shuttered feed store. Cal handed him a folded map with Pier 7 marked in red. "I've got your layout," he said. "Main gate's guarded, but there's a side entrance along the east fence. Chain link with a padlock, easy enough if you've got the right tools. Cameras only cover the main yard, not the private bay. And the trucks?" Ethan asked. "They start loading at 12:15. By 1 they're rolling out. The cargo's listed as machinery, but from what I've heard, it's packed with smaller boxes inside the crates. Could be anything." Ethan nodded, already building the sequence in his mind. "We get eyes on the handoff, photos, video. Then I get it straight to Vaughn." Cal hesitated. "You sure you want to be there? If they spot you—" "They won't," Ethan said firmly, "and if they do, I'll make sure they remember it was their mistake." Thursday arrived clear and cold. All day, Ethan kept his movements ordinary, helping Jacob with a puzzle, taking out the trash, reading on the porch. But as night fell, the air seemed to tighten. By 11, Claire and Jacob were asleep, the cameras were live, and the radios were on the kitchen counter. He left in his old pickup, taking back roads until the glow of the docks appeared through the trees. Parking in a shadowed pull-off, he killed the lights and walked the last quarter-mile to the east fence. Kill had been right. The padlock was nothing special. 2 minutes and it hung open, swinging gently. From there the view opened to the private bay. 2 semis idled, exhaust drifting upward in pale clouds. Men in dark jackets moved with purpose, sliding crates onto forklifts, then into the trucks. Ethan crouched behind a stack of pallets, camera in hand, snapping frame after frame. Zoomed shots caught labels, faces, license plates. Then he saw him, Grant Harrow, standing near the open trailer, talking to a stocky man with a clipboard. They shook hands, and Grant handed over a thin envelope. The stocky man slipped it into his coat without even glancing inside. Ethan kept filming until the first truck pulled away, its taillights glowing red against the dark water. Then he retreated the way he came, careful not to draw attention. By the time he reached his truck, his phone buzzed with a message from Cull. "You good?" "Got what we need," Ethan replied. And then some. As he drove home, the evidence sat secure in his jacket pocket. It was more than just proof of illegal shipments. It was the beginning of a case that could crack the Caldwells open from the inside. And once that happened, they wouldn't have the reach to touch Claire or Jacob again. By mid-morning, Ethan was standing in Officer Tessa Vaughn's office, the manila envelope from last night, sitting between them like a loaded weapon. She closed the blinds before she even opened it. He watched her sift through the contents, clear shots of the trucks, the license plates, the dock layout, and most importantly, a series of zoomed frames that showed Grant Harrow handing off the envelope to the stocky man. "This is better than I hoped," Vaughan said, tapping one photo with her finger. That man with the clipboard, his name's Victor Lomas. Been on our radar for smuggling contraband into the county for years, but we've never been able to tie him to a legitimate business front. If we can link him to the Harrows Shipping Company, this becomes a federal case. Ethan leaned forward. And that means Claire and Jacob get immediate protection. It means leverage, Vaughan said. The kind that makes even wealthy families panic, but it also means they'll start looking for the leak. He'd been expecting that. They can look all they want. I'm not hiding. Vaughan gave a small, wry smile. Be careful with that pride, Mr. Cole. The Harrows don't fight fair. When he left the station, the air felt heavier, as if the day itself knew the balance had shifted. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he saw just how quickly the Caldwells could answer a move against them. A black SUV sat parked across the road, idling. The windows were tinted, the license plate mud-smeared. Ethan didn't need to see inside to know whose people it was. He walked to the mailbox slowly, deliberately, never glancing directly at the vehicle. Whoever was in there wanted him to react, to show fear or give them a reason to escalate. Back inside, Claire stood at the window, pale. They've been there for half an hour, she said. Jacob keeps asking why they don't leave. Ethan closed the curtains. Ignore them. They're trying to send a message. All it means is they're nervous. That evening, while Jacob was playing in the den, Ethan's phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. He answered without speaking. A woman's voice came through, low and cold. You're making mistakes, Mr. Cole. You're stepping into things that don't concern you. Protecting my daughter and grandson concerns me, he said evenly. There was a pause, then the unmistakable edge of Evelyn Harrow's tone. Families who cross us regret it. You have until tomorrow to drop whatever you've been doing, or you won't like the alternative. She hung up before he could reply. Ethan stared at the phone for a long moment, then set it down and went to check the front lock again. Threats were a sign of pressure, and pressure meant cracks. The Caldwells were feeling the walls close in, even if they wouldn't admit it. The next step would be to make those walls close faster, and Ethan was more than ready to start pushing. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. He sat at the kitchen table long after Claire and Jacob had gone to bed, the only light coming from the small lamp near the fridge. Evelyn Harrow's voice still echoed in his head, controlled, dangerous, certain she was the one holding the strings. But he'd heard that tone before, in war zones and backroom negotiations. It was the sound of someone who needed control so badly that the mere thought of losing it made them reckless. By morning he had his plan. Instead of retreating from Evelyn's warning, he'd use it. If she believed he was just a stubborn father meddling in things he didn't understand, she'd underestimate him. And people who underestimated him tended to make mistakes. He called Cal first. They're rattled. I want them to think they've got me cornered. All right, Cal said slowly. What's the move? I'm going to make them believe I'm willing to trade what I know for Claire and Jacob's safety. They'll want proof I have something valuable, and in trying to verify it, they'll show their hand. Cal chuckled softly. Old bait and trap. You sure you're not itching to be back in uniform? Not unless they start issuing coffee that doesn't taste like motor oil, Ethan said. That afternoon, he sent a message to the same block number that had called him the night before. We need to talk. You want this to end. Meet me tomorrow, 3 p.m., Grant's old marina office. It was a place Ethan knew was half abandoned, just enough of a public space to keep them from doing anything too blatant. Claire noticed his focus but didn't ask questions. He told her only what she needed to know, that she and Jacob should spend the next day with a neighbor he trusted. She agreed, though her eyes lingered on him like she wanted to say more. The next day, he arrived at the marina 20 minutes early and took a seat on the weathered bench outside the office. The air smelled of brine and rust, gulls circling overhead. At 3:05, a black SUV rolled up. Evelyn stepped out first, immaculate in a cream coat despite the wind, Grant following behind her with a scowl that could curdle milk. You wanted to talk? Evelyn said, her voice calm but her eyes sharp. Ethan held a manila envelope on his lap, thick enough to suggest it held more than it did. I've got information, photos, shipment details, names. You leave Claire and Jacob alone and maybe it never sees daylight. Grant snorted. You think we believe you'd just walk away? I think you're smart enough to know the damage this could do if it hits the wrong desk, Ethan replied. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. And what exactly are you asking? Simple. Ethan said. "No more visits, no more threats. Claire keeps Jacob free and clear. In return, I disappear from your business." They didn't answer right away. Instead, Evelyn turned to Grant, murmuring something too low to catch. But Ethan saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the small tightening of her jaw. She was interested, and interested meant she'd start moving pieces to figure out how much he really had. That was exactly what he wanted. Every move they made to confirm his bluff would bring them closer to exposing themselves completely. And when they did, Officer Vaughn and Attorney Price would be ready to close the door. As the SUV pulled away, Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders ease, not because the danger had passed, but because the trap was finally in motion. The Caldwells didn't waste time. By the next morning, Carl called with news. "They've been sniffing around Pier 7, he said. "Not their usual crew either. These are suits, talking to dock supervisors, asking about cameras, who has access to what. They're trying to figure out how much you've got." Ethan almost smiled. Good. That means they're nervous enough to make mistakes. Mistakes came faster than he expected. That afternoon, Officer Vaughn called him in. "One of our patrol units picked up chatter on an open radio frequency," she said. "A private security team, asking if anyone knew where a certain package had ended up. The way they described it, it's your envelope. They think it's the only copy of the evidence." Ethan leaned forward. "Which means they'll try to grab it instead of destroying what's left on their end." Vaughn nodded. "If they move it without realizing we're watching, we can get a search warrant." "You think you can keep them on the hook long enough?" "I can," Ethan said. "But when they take the bait, I want the net ready." That evening he made sure to be seen. He took the manila envelope, the one stuffed with nothing more than old tax forms, and drove into town, stopping for gas, lingering outside the coffee shop, making it obvious he was carrying something under his arm. Twice he caught sight of a black SUV, a block behind him. Perfect. He ended the night at the old rail yard, parking under a flickering light before walking toward the maintenance sheds. It was there, in the shadow of the largest shed, that two men stepped out, blocking his path. "We'll take that," the taller one said. Ethan didn't resist. He handed it over like he was just tired of carrying the weight. "Be careful with it," he said, his voice flat. "Could change your whole world." They didn't bother with a reply, just turned and disappeared into the dark. Ethan waited until they were gone before speaking into the small mic clipped inside his jacket. "They've got it. Your move." Within 30 minutes, Vaughn's team had eyes on the SUV as it pulled into a Harrow-owned storage facility. They watched as the men took the envelope inside, and then as Grant himself arrived. What they didn't know was that Vaughn already had a warrant in hand, tied to an ongoing investigation into Victor Lomas. The raid went down fast. Federal agents moved in, not just at the storage facility, but at the Harrow estate and their downtown office. Crates were opened, ledgers seized, hard drives bagged. Vaughn later told Ethan that one of the ledgers alone would keep prosecutors busy for a year. By dawn, Evelyn and Grant Harrow were in custody, facing a list of charges long enough to fold over twice. Vaughn confirmed what Ethan had been waiting to hear. Claire has full custody of Jacob, effective immediately. No visitation without court approval, which, given the charges, they'll never get. When Ethan returned home, Claire was in the kitchen, Jacob asleep on the couch. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. It's over, he said simply. For the first time in weeks, the house felt lighter. The shadows had lifted, and in their place was a quiet certainty, one Ethan had fought for every step of the way. The Caldwells had thought they could intimidate him into silence. Instead, they'd handed him the last piece he needed to tear their world apart. And now, all that remained of their power was the echo of a door slamming shut behind them. 2 days later, the news broke in full. Every local station led with it. Prominent Harrow family under federal investigation, flashing images of Grant and Evelyn being led out of their estate in cuffs. The footage ran on a loop, Evelyn's expression frozen between rage and disbelief, Grant's jaw set like a man trying to pretend he still had control. Ethan sat on the couch with his morning coffee, watching the coverage without satisfaction in his expression, though deep down, a slow-burning sense of justice was taking root. This wasn't about enjoying their downfall, it was about knowing Claire and Jacob were safe in a way they hadn't been in years. Claire came in from the porch, her phone still in her hand. "It's everywhere," she said softly. "Friends, neighbors, they're all texting me." You don't have to answer anyone, Ethan said. Let the headlines speak for themselves. She set the phone down and sat beside him. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to, he replied. You did the hard part, living through it until you could get free. I just made sure the door stayed open when you ran. Jacob padded into the room in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Mum, Grandpa, are we still going to the park today? Claire smiled, the first real smile he'd seen on her in months. Yeah, buddy, we are. That afternoon, they walked the park trail together, the November wind crisp but clean. Jacob ran ahead, laughing as he chased a gust of leaves. Claire stayed close to Ethan, her hand brushing his arm from time to time, as if checking that he was still there. You know they'll never admit what they did, she said after a while. They don't have to, Ethan replied. They've lost the one thing they care about, their control. The rest is just noise. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Ethan watched his grandson race across the open field, his laughter carrying on the wind. In that sound, there was no fear, no hesitation, just the freedom every child deserved. He realized then that this was the real revenge. Not the arrests, not the headlines, not even the list of charges that would likely keep the Harrows behind bars for decades. The true victory was that Claire and Jacob could live their lives without looking over their shoulders. Ethan had been a soldier long enough to know that some battles leave you with scars you can't see, but he also knew that winning meant those scars didn't define you. As they headed back toward the truck, Claire glanced at him. You're really not going to gloat? Not even a little. He smiled faintly. The best revenge is watching them fade into nothing. And we've got better things to do than look back. They drove home in the fading light, the farmhouse warm and waiting. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead felt wide open. Winter settled over the valley sooner than usual that year, the first snow falling in a slow, steady curtain. From the porch, Ethan watched the fields turn white, the fence posts wearing little caps of frost. Inside, the farmhouse smelled of cinnamon and pine. Claire had insisted on putting up a Christmas tree early for Jacob. It had been 3 weeks since the Harrows' arrest. The legal process churned on in the background, arraignments, bail hearings, property seizures, but none of it reached their doorstep anymore. Officer Vaughan kept Ethan updated, her tone lighter each time they spoke. They're boxed in, she'd said the last time. Even their lawyers can't find a way out that doesn't involve prison time. Claire seemed lighter now too. The deep lines of tension in her face had softened, replaced by the easy warmth he remembered from years ago. Jacob had stopped glancing at the windows every time a car drove by. These were small changes, but to Ethan they felt like the difference between holding your breath and finally letting it out. One evening, as snowflakes drifted past the windows, Claire set 2 mugs of hot cocoa on the coffee table and sat beside him. You ever think about how close we came to losing all this? She asked quietly. Every day, Ethan said. That's why I'll never take it for granted again. She was quiet for a moment, then said, You didn't just save us. You gave us our lives back. He shook his head. You saved yourself. I just made sure no one could drag you back. The fireplace crackled in the silence that followed, the warmth of the flames pushing back the winter chill. Jacob's laughter drifted in from the other room where he was building a tower of wooden blocks. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound settle deep inside. Justice, he thought, didn't always roar. Sometimes it was the quiet after the storm, the peace that came when you knew the people you loved could sleep through the night without fear. As the snow deepened outside, Ethan realized the fight was truly over. The Harrows had lost their grip, their influence, their ability to harm. All that remained was their absence, a hollow where their power used to be. And for him, for Claire, and for Jacob, that emptiness was worth more than any verdict could give. Call to action. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and justice, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Your support helps us share more stories where truth and courage win.